Hey everybody, it's RJ, your host, and welcome to Hash It Out. In this episode, I'll be speaking with Jordan Lams of Moxie about what it was like to start a cannabis company at the forefront of a nascent stage of the cannabis industry, and what it's like now to operate a cannabis company in the height of a global pandemic. We'll also discuss the ever-changing state of cannabis regulations in the US, what the practical components to social equity look like in the cannabis industry, the state of environmentality in the cannabis industry, and more. Sin más preámbulos, let's hash it out. My guest today is the founder and chief executive officer of the cannabis company Moxie. Welcome to the show, Jordan Lams. Hello, sir. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. How you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. Thanks so much for sitting down and having a conversation with me today, sharing all that you've got going on over, of course, at Moxie, and then going into some of the wider cannabis discussions throughout our country and, even worldwide. But first and foremost, where are you joining us live from today?
Today I'm live from Las Vegas.
Las Vegas? Oh, I was literally just there over the weekend. I got family up over by Summerlin. So, yeah, love it out there.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Up in that area.
Oh, okay, cool. It's interesting. I was just talking to my brother about this yesterday. We have yet to ever go to Vegas for Vegas because we have family there. So it's like every time we go, it's like we tell our friends oh, I'm going to Vegas for the weekend. They're like, ooh, Vegas. And I'm like, no, it's my niece's birthday, but all good. Same thing.
It's the same. My dad grew up out here. So as a kid, came here for family every holiday, every birthday. And then wasn't until well into my 20s that I got the actual Vegas experience, and was
Sure.
it's pretty polarizing when you're used to just coming into a very suburb kind of culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you ever spend as a local of sorts, do you spend a lot of time doing the Vegas-y things like the strip and stuff like that? Because I don't find myself on the strip very often at all.
Not all the time, but it's really nice to have it there. So what I've gotten pretty good at is finding the weeks where you can get a great deal on a staycation, and we'll ditch the kids with the grandparents and go down and grab a room for a night and get a nice meal. But also, being involved in a business that's all over the country, people are always coming into town for something or another. So you find yourself always entertaining, business associates or friends. And the really cool thing about it is that you get people at their best when they come into Vegas. They're really ready to have a good time. They're ready to do a lot. And so, it's more fun than if you were hosting people in Skokie, Illinois. No disrespect to Skokie, of course.
Oh, of course. But yeah, I totally feel that. Yeah, there's a certain, when people come to Vegas, there's a certain openness to have an experience. So that probably does facilitate or promote some good business networking in that sort of space. Got to be why there are a lot of business conventions, particularly in the cannabis space, that take place in Las Vegas. So diving in here, for those who may not know about Moxie, Moxie has received over 80 global cannabis awards with products, as you mentioned, distributed in California, Michigan, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. The company has established state, local, and municipal relationships and was actually awarded the first and second state licenses in California and one of the first 12 licenses in Pennsylvania since its founding the company founded in 2014 or 2015?
Yeah,
somewhere between there.
Yeah, got the idea and named it in 2014. It was actually formally out there and off to the races by 2015. And that
Gotcha.
I think you got an out-of-date line of copy. We actually were over 100 industry awards at this point.
Oh, well, love that. Love to hear that. Yeah, right on. So my first question for you then would be, looking back, what was it like for you to sort of start a cannabis company before recreational cannabis legislation existed in states like California and Nevada, which legalized in 2016, and Michigan, which legalized in 2018? What was it like to sort of be really in the forefront of such a the most nascent stage of the industry in many places?
Man, how long you got? Each,
all day,
each
man.
It's really each location's kind of its own unique snowflake. So you mentioned California and Nevada, which passed, adult use around the same time, but the medical programs between the two before adult use couldn't have been more different. Nevada came out with a very deliberate and regulated license framework for the medical program before they had adult use, whereas California was this free for all of operating under the act that was passed in '96 and the subsequent Senate bills that hoped to regulate it into some way, shape, or form. But it's everything from like ushering in something that's never had rules into one of the most regulated frameworks you could ever see. Also going from like, the Wild West into, a marginal approach to regulation, and then subsequently into one that's far more rigid, and a long, long ramp of enforcement and adoption of all of that. And then, on the East Coast, you have like a very different culture too. It hyper medically driven, whereas on the West Coast, even in Nevada, with a very regulated outset to their medical market, it was still kind of like, yeah, you go see the doc, and the doc gets you your card, and then you can go
Right.
get your stuff. And whereas on the East Coast, they took it and seriously to a level that really gave me a lot of like hope for the future, because I got into this industry for very acutely the fact that there's tremendous medical benefit to cannabis as a therapy. And I always hated when it got kind of like marginalized to this like loophole that stoners could use to legally access recreational cannabis. And
Right.
to see, particularly in Pennsylvania, where there's just this really robust medical system of universities and hospital systems, and doctors that are studying and researching and administering therapies across a wide array of different ailments, and in these institutions of healthcare, was incredible. As they took it seriously, they didn't have that like Spicoli undertones to their discussions, and that made me feel really good and validated in a lot of ways, that like what we've been pushing for, and the shoulders that we've been standing on the patients that advocated for their own needs, that got us to this place legislatively and regulatorily, like that it wasn't in vain, that their
Mm,
legacies are being respected. And
mm.
I think of the late great Eddie Lepp, who was a friend, and who I had the pleasure of meeting right as I was getting into the industry, was right as he was getting locked up. And it's just always been something in the back of my mind as we go and take every step, is like, what did these guys risk it all and ultimately pay, some of them, the ultimate price
Mm.
to proliferate? And are we honoring that? And there's a lot of those inflection points where it makes me feel really great, like we've done right by those guys in that history.
Totally. I'm curious. You mentioned that what you've seen happening on the East Coast has sort of given you hope for like the future of regulatory policies regarding the cannabis industry, particularly when it comes to medical accessibility and medical products. I remember when I first moved to California, I got like my medical license, and it was like through like it was like the first like Zoom, not it was before Zoom. It was like a Skype call that I had with a doctor in my apartment, and he was like, "So what's up?" And I was like, I like my back hurts," and he's like, "Oh well, here you go," and like texted me my like recommendation, and like that was it. And so like I'm curious what your thoughts are when you see like places in the East Coast taking it more seriously on the medical side. What does that do for like the how does that lend itself to like the legitimization of the cannabis industry, particularly when it comes to helping people understand that cannabis truly does have medical benefits?
Well, first, let's take a second and just acknowledge the hilariousness of the fact that it was the cannabis industry that spooled up the entire telemarketing industry, or sorry, telemedicine industry.
Yeah,
Like, back then, like people kind of dogged it, like, oh, you can get your cannabis card on a Skype call. Now it's like, I mean, how much of primary care do we do via teleconferencing? It's this
sure,
like blown up into this huge thing. So
sure.
funny. I think the most obvious thing that it does is like the immediate credibility that lends to adjacent locales and regulatory geographies. So like Pennsylvania being an excellent example, it kind of jumped out in the middle of a bunch of marketplaces on the East Coast that are historically conservative in a lot of their values, particularly as it relates to drug use and cannabis. And when it worked well for them, well, what happened? The surrounding states saw, oh, we got to get on board with this. And places that even had more of a generally accepting culture for recreational cannabis had taken their time and largely failed at implementing a program at all, or a successful program. And you can look to states like New Jersey that are next door that have incredibly high rates of cannabis use amongst the population, but have just really dragged their feet to get these programs out there in a way that's meaningful to patients. And when you have that regulated in a tight and historically conservative culture working, it kind of forces these other states or other geographies to get on the same page. And so that's the most immediate. I think the second is just that all of this is a war of attrition to some extent. Every victory, while hard to take the moment to punctuate and celebrate, is progress. And even when you have silly programs like Texas with their CBD only thing, and but hey, it's something. There are people that are now getting access to things they didn't have before. And even though there's still so much to get done, so much more ground to cover, it's a win. And you look back to I've been in this business as long as I have. You look back to the early days to really try to predict the future and see, everybody can imagine where it's gonna go. Federal legalization, it's all good everywhere. That's pretty simple. But to understand that transition, this decades long transition, and all of the different inflection points and successes that have to be achieved to ultimately realize that end goal, it's a lot harder to speculate on. And I don't think that anyone could say that any one of these programs or the way that all of it's shaken out has lived up to any measure of expectation. It's wild, but it's market improvement and market progress.
Sure. And it's, as you mentioned, we still have such a long way to go to make sure that we've done it right. But I don't think that is any reason for us to not reflect upon the victories that we do have. For example, you mentioned the CBD in Texas. It's not obviously, full access to all medical cannabis, but, access to CBD is something that many people in Texas are going to be benefiting from. Y'all over at Moxie have been in business now for the better part of a decade, almost 6-7 years now, if I have my math correct. I'm curious how you would compare and contrast what it was like starting a cannabis company, again, during a relatively nascent stage of the legal cannabis industry in the U.S., to what it is like now after being, again, almost a decade in operation, navigating now a pandemic that has, deeply affected so many industries and just about every person in our country and worldwide. Has being at the forefront of an industry and, having to stay nimble and adjust course, to the ever-changing state of cannabis regulations in this country, has any of that sort of offered you an advantage to navigating these unprecedented times, to use that term for the 2 millionth time?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways in which you could approach that question, because the industry has evolved so much. And I think the most important thing to say that just paints a bigger picture here is, we've got an opportunity to work with, a lot of incredible entrepreneurs, professionals, and business people from outside the cannabis industry that have gotten involved, since we started this business. And there's largely all of them will tell you that this is the hardest thing that they've ever done.
Sure.
So, when you kind of put that into perspective to then dealing with some, force majeure event like a global pandemic, there's some level of preparation just in the arduousness of what it takes to exist in this world. And then, getting, blindsided by something no one really could have predicted the impact of. I mean, yeah, there's a level of agility that you have to have when your whole business model can get uprooted by, a regulatory change overnight. And, practical things that impact how you do business can seem like minutia and, little details that shouldn't matter. But, something as simple as a labeling change or a packaging change could, render millions of dollars of inventory, obsolete.
Right.
And so you get used to having to, very quickly react to unexpected events and be able to pivot. And what I think we've developed as a really strong muscle at Moxie internally over the years is resiliency. We've been through so many, kind of tumultuous events where you have to, reinvent or, adapt and do it really quickly. And, that definitely helped when the pandemic hit. And, we made some really tough decisions early on at the outset of the pandemic that were just proactive. I think before people were really fully accepting that this was real and it wasn't going away anytime soon. I mean, look, we're entering the third year of the pandemic now. I remember phone calls from the first couple weeks of lockdown, people telling me,
Yeah.
oh, this will be, 2 weeks and it'll be back to
2 weeks.
normal.
Yeah. Oh, I heard that so many times. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we'll be back at the office. No big deal. And I
Sure.
remember just like wanting to have that level of optimism, but knowing that ultimately as an employer and as someone who, aside of the lives that we employ and needing to protect those, we also have the lives of our consumers to consider. And being in this kind of interesting cross section of like, a technology, a culture, and a therapy, a
Mm-hmm.
wellness product, we have to be cognizant of being consistent for them as well. And
Mm.
so we made decisions that were not popular early on based on that, this might not go away very quickly. This could be the new normal for a while. And how do we, do the greatest good within what is our core value set? Um, and so we did that early on. And I think, frankly, it saved us a lot of pain later. And not to say that it's gotten any
Certainly.
easier. The pandemic's still raging. Now we're dealing with the other side of what happened last year with in the way of inflation and all that. But
Mm-hmm.
just having that ability to like react quickly and decisively in a way that we're gonna like pruning a tree, right? You're gonna prune some branches off so that you can grow them back bigger and stronger. And that's a muscle we built up pretty strong, I think, over the years.
Totally. And now that Omicron entered the chat, it's almost like I keep hearing like it's almost back like to like we're like back to square one with the pandemic. And so and I think one of the great things about people in the cannabis industry, and this is something that I've heard frequently with guests on the show, is that just being in the cannabis industry lends itself to having to stay super nimble, super flexible, super responsive to things changing on a day-to-day basis, on a minute-by-minute basis. Having to stay flexible based on what state or what region or even what city or town you might be in might have different regulations there. And so being in the cannabis industry certainly lends itself to remaining nimble and remaining on your toes when it comes to having to make these last minute adjustments, which, we see again with the pandemic. And then we've also just seen historically throughout the year so far in the cannabis industry, in industries throughout the US. My next question for you then would be, through the years that we've seen waves of legalization throughout the U.S., the topic of cannabis policy reform on a federal level has been an increasing topic of discussion. However, the state, again, of these cannabis regulations remains very much in flux. So, in your view, tell me about how the challenges to starting a successful cannabis company have changed so far throughout the years, and then what are some of the ways that you could see to streamline the process and help ensure, most importantly, equitable success and equitable access to these opportunities?
Yeah, that's the topic du jour, isn't it? Is how do we, equitably spread around the opportunity? And I think the conclusion I've come to is that there is no singular answer.
Mm,
I've seen a lot of valiant efforts, a lot of questionable efforts, and no one's figured it out quite right.
sure.
And kind of back to the comment at the beginning of the discussion, like each state is its own unique snowflake. So
Mm,
you have a California where they've tried really hard, often in vain, to make it an open market where everyone can get access. But, now you have still a difficult framework for people to get licensed and involved in, but a lot of people participating. And with that comes the double-edged sword of a hyper competitive market and an overly commoditizing economic, dynamic. And so therefore, is it even sustainable the way that it's gone, trying to have everybody
Mm.
participate? On the other side of the coin, you've got marketplaces that, the only way to get in is if you were in the club, and you put, a lot of the right money into the right places. And, a lot of those, however, the benefit going to those who probably don't need it as much, they are sustainable ecosystems. So there's no perfect answer here. And I'm a big proponent. And, one of the things that we're focused on within Moxie, as well as all of our investments at Moxie, is trying to be a part of, developing this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And
Wow.
it really starts on the home front. And I know this isn't answering your question, but like what
Hmm.
we've come to realize is that rather than like expecting that these frameworks are going to solve these problems and empower the disenfranchised, we've realized that we have to contribute to that, but more importantly, we have to look internally and make deliberate decisions about who are we training up to take over leadership roles within the company? Who are our partners that we
Mm.
invest alongside with or get involved into business with? And that,
Sure.
seems to be, it's like the baby steps, but we feel like we can measure incrementally the change that's impacted a lot more feasibly than, some of these areas where people say, oh, everybody, social equity licensing and,
Right.
then they still got to go sell their souls to someone with the money.
Right.
That's the big challenge within the space. So
Yeah.
sorry, I know I got away from the question there, but
No, not at all. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Yeah, I think that's a very important piece of the discussion that perhaps hasn't really been focused on it as much. I feel like social equity is like when someone hears social equity in the cannabis industry, a lot of the times people just think it's just like, oh, we just make sure that everyone has a fair chance. But it's like it's so much deeper than that. It's like it's systemic, if anything. There needs to be like foundational steps put in place to ensure that everyone has those equal opportunities, but then also to ensure that the people who actually know what they're doing are the ones that reach those successful positions, right? um, Speaking a little further then on this idea of social equity in the cannabis industry, if I have this right, you are among the founding directors, or is it the founding director of the National Hispanic Cannabis Council, or are you
no,
among
one of there was a
one
group
of?
of us
Okay,
that came
that's what I
together. Yeah.
thought. Gotcha. So, for those who may not know, the National Hispanic Cannabis Council has medical, legal, and economic advisory panels, and you have said that, quote, despite the extensive involvement in the industry, Hispanic representation industry-wide is significantly under-indexed. Adding that, quote, we must consciously create platforms of education, representation, and equity to ensure the cannabis industry produces the greatest opportunities for those that are otherwise at risk of being marginalized, both as stakeholders in the industry and as consumers/patients. Now, with that said, tell me about the work then that NHCC does specifically to increase accessibility to those opportunities. And then beyond just, everyone has a fair chance, what are some of the practical components to social equity in the cannabis industry? What do those practical components look like?
Well, you know, first, the NHCC is brand new. We just were born out of the pandemic. I think we're only coming up on our 1 year anniversary in the next
Oh,
couple of months. So, best part about it is,
happy, early congratulations.
yeah, thank you. It's
Yeah.
it's been very rewarding to see this come together, and I got to hand it to Tony Valdez and Jose Hidalgo and the rest of the group that really brought the idea to us, where we just said yes, we will give you our support 100% because we saw the need. But practically, to answer your question, like
Sure.
you talk about my quote there about how we've been under indexing such a huge participating stakeholder group within the industry. When was the
Mm-hmm.
last time you saw a piece of informational material that was printed in English and Spanish? And what
Yes.
percentage of the workforce do you think actually is English as a second language, if English at all?
Mm-hmm.
So the practical steps we're taking are a lot of the simple stuff, just creating accessible resources to this humongous contributing group within our industry. We're primarily in the manufacturing business, so we have not only amongst all of our staff, but even our founding group, a very large Latino and Hispanic contingent. And, it just like when you think of simple things, like there's just not even like a Spanish language website to educate people on the medical benefits or the laws. Like,
Yeah.
that's where we got to start.
Yeah.
Is doing this stuff like that. And luckily it's simple and it's quick and everybody's very passionate. So we're really able to start now taking our head up to, bigger initiatives. But
Hmm.
we're also still like totally on the recruitment front, despite how kind of obvious of a need this is, there's a lot of the bigger players that, haven't gotten involved yet. They participate in all of the big, industry association groups that are trying to push forward their economic interests, but I think it's less obvious why this is such a bolster to even the bottom line when you're a part of it, because when you actually cultivate a group of people and give the resources for them to develop and grow within their own careers, that pays dividends. And so
Hmm.
we put our focus there. Like we don't participate in much of the federal legalization pushes, where a lot of the big players do. We're focused on kind of the groundswell, grassroots front, because at the end of the day, it's the people that are going to build this industry. It's not the government that's going to overregulate it and overtax it. That's going to make it what it can be. It's the people that operate in it every day.
Wow, I'm so glad you brought that up. Like, I feel like, again, it goes back to what we mentioned earlier in the conversation when it comes to these smaller victories that may be smaller in scale, but are not by any means less important and less fundamental to lay down that groundwork of making sure that we build a responsible industry in the cannabis space. So thank you so much for bringing all that up. That's such a that's such a great piece of information. I'm very excited for our viewers and our listeners to hear that. I want to move back to ask you another question about Moxie, because another growing topic of discussion in the cannabis industry is that involving energy consumption, packaging waste, and the environmental impacts that come with cannabis production and manufacturing. Moxie last year, if I have this right, launched sustainability efforts, including committing to being the first carbon negative cannabis company. So my question for you is, what does that endeavor look like, and why was it important for Moxie to go beyond being a carbon neutral company to being a carbon negative company?
Well, at first, I think it's important to just note how we decided to do that, because it's not too difficult if you're willing to throw a check at it to use carbon credits and get yourself neutral or negative. We
Sure.
wanted to do it practically. Like if you were to measure our real carbon footprint, where do we sit? And I think the things that we've started to do that with are the obvious. We've changed out lighting and cultivations to be more eco-conscious. We're picking, sometimes driven by even regulatory stuff in California around the types of fixtures that you have to use throughout. I mean, you'd be surprised to learn how much goes into picking a light switch when it comes to this kind of stuff. But then
Sure.
there's the big footprint too of we have a lot of stuff that gets packaged into horrendously inefficient packaging styles because of the regulation around child resistance, and
Yes.
poison protection. And then you also have the things that you're putting into it, vape cartridges and all of these different
Hmm.
new devices that are being used within the space are using a lot of non-renewable materials, and a lot of
Hmm.
times there's no way around that. So picking your partners and who has the best practices for manufacturing become a consideration. I think the biggest lesson that we've learned is that it's going to cost more than we thought, and it's going to be a lot harder than we thought. So we're not as far along as we would have liked. And it's a consistent battle to remind yourself of why you're doing it. All the time
Sure.
we're looking at, our bill of materials of the products that we produce. And you look at that, very sustainably sourced, recyclable packaging line item, which oftentimes, is one of the largest single items. And people are asking, well, why are we paying this for this when, we could make up X percentage of additional gross margin by using that? And, it becomes that reminder of, well, it's the right thing to do, so we have to.
Right.
And
Right.
there's just so much willingness to save dollars for convenience or necessity amongst this industry because of how capital intensive it is. The practical approach that we've had to take is like, let's stick to our guns on this, even if, to your point earlier, it's only those those baby steps, they still do have to be celebrated, because just even getting to a point where we did have a supply chain of reasonably affordable, sustainable packaging that, was, printed using the right kind of inks that don't damage, the earth, that's sourced from, FSC certified
Mm-hmm.
suppliers, and also that's reliable, that we can get it when we
Mm-hmm.
need it, especially in this era of supply chain disruption. Like, those are market successes that have to be taken stock of. That being said, we've looked, way down the horizon too, to much, much bigger picture um, opportunities for how to further reduce the carbon footprint. And some of the stuff I don't want to touch on, because it's kind of like a, sort of secret trade knowledge that we're still working on.
Feel
But
that. Yeah.
there's a lot of opportunity out there. It is going to take a bigger effort on the way of the industry and their willingness to risk dollars for it. Like, not all of this stuff to save the planet is going to come with immediate, accretion to the bottom line. A lot of times you're going to have to spend more to do the right thing. Although our belief is that in the long run, you make that up in spades, especially when you look to, the next generation of consumers that are coming up. They statistically care more about the well-being of the earth than they do their
Yeah.
own financial stability. And so
Right.
if these people that are ultimately consuming our product and will be our lifelong customers feel this way, we have to reflect that value set in some way, shape, or form, or, multitude of forms.
Mm.
So, it starts with the little things, and you work your way up from there. And, there
Certainly.
is a good push, though, I'm seeing amongst, a lot of the incumbent operators, like the guys that have been doing it for a little while, like we have. They have that willingness to just, like, what, nope, it's the right thing, so we're going to stick to that. And,
Mm.
that willingness to not compromise is what's going to drive the whole industry further, I think.
Certainly. And you know what? I'm so glad to see that you have that, that willingness at Moxie, and you're carrying that throughout the business model, because it's not super easy to convince, big companies to do the right thing and perhaps sacrifice some profitability here and there for that good thing, for that right thing. So it's encouraging, and it's great to hear that there are companies such as Moxie out there that are putting that as the forefront, and are looking toward the future and have that, that sort of foresight to understand that, again, you will make that up in spades in the long run. So my last question for you then would be, looking forward toward that horizon that you mentioned, moving into 2022 and beyond. What are y'all looking forward to over at Moxie, and what have y'all got in the works that you can share with me? Which, by the way, you are welcome back if you do have something to share regarding that stuff you teased earlier. Please feel free to reach out. But yeah, what have you got? What have you got looking forward to in the coming years?
Yeah, so like many, the pandemic and, a number of other contributing factors over the last couple of years have had us look really closely at the way that we do everything. And so we've actually, like, deliberately pivoted a pretty integral part of the way that we are planning our growth strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that it's going to look different than, Moxie branded products getting into more markets and in the hands of more consumers all the time, with, always striving to make the best stuff that we can. So,
Of
at
course.
the end of the day, if we don't want to consume it, we're not going to put it out to the customers or the patients.
Mm-hmm.
But we have, like, actually kind of deliberately said, all right, the way in which we're going to go about doing this is gonna shift, and it's going to be something that's going to be cognizant of, our fiduciary duty to our shareholders and our investors, as well as the best way to consistently serve our consumer base. And so we've got a couple new markets that we're opening up at the beginning of next year. We just
Ooh.
opened earlier this year a pharmacy in Utah, and have a partnership with two of the others. So three of the 14 are kind of in this, like, new little ecosystem of ours. And we're about to open up our processing facility out there and actually get our branded products into the market and onto our dispensary shelves here soon. There's a couple more on the back of that, yeah, I'll have to wait until next time to chat about. But that's what we're excited
For
about,
sure.
is actually revealing to the world this new strategy. And what comes in tandem with that we'll keep you guys posted on as well, is we're looking to launch an equity offering through the equity crowdfunding regulation known as Regulation A, which basically allows us to sell shares to all of our consumers that know and love our brand. We have a lot of super fans all around the world
Yeah.
that would love to own a piece of the business. And there's a way that, and like everything in cannabis, it's not simple. It's a pretty arduously regulated SEC equity offering, but we're actually going to offer shares. We hope to, if I use the correct language, so the SEC doesn't yell at me. We hope to offer shares to normal people. And the big banner for us, the message in all of this is like, cannabis is for everyone. The product itself, the progress that we have, as I said earlier, like we're standing on the shoulders of people who fought for this for their own needs.
Yeah.
And so, as we talked about, even, the equitable access to the industry, we thought, okay, obviously we want to go and empower other operators. We want to partner with people who, have been disenfranchised by the war on drugs. But what else can we do to ensure that we're not concentrating the benefit of this to, the powers that be, if you will. And so through this offering type that has really picked up a popularity over the last couple of years, we're now able to democratize interest in Moxie. And so rather than have, it be the big hedge funds on Bay Street or Wall Street that own the business and, trade in and out of it like a commodity, we're going to let, the people that have gotten us where we are today share in the future of the business. And so between that and, getting into these new markets with this new model that we'll kind of get to reveal to the world with this offering, we're very excited. It's a big change, and it's something that few are getting to do within the space. But what we believe it's going to do, in addition to giving access to those that have gotten us here, is it's going to empower the business and our consumers to continue furthering those interests, like our sustainability initiative, like getting carbon negative. It's a lot harder to push those interests if you have a hedge fund breathing down your neck over the bottom line, because they're less willing to compromise over the economics than they are the real impact that we're having holistically in our existence here on this planet. And so by letting the people that believe truly into our core values into the business, we think that it's going to open up a world of possibilities for continuing to do what our 3 core values tell us to do. And that's 1, be pioneers, be out there, pushing the envelope. 2, be role models while you do it the right way. And all because of the core value number 3, which is that we're so passionate about cannabis. Like, we can't compromise. So that's 2022 in a nutshell.
Wow. Woo! Y'all got some work to do, but hey, it all sounds super, super great. And I'm so grateful for you coming on and sharing all of that information and all of your perspective, man. Thank you so much. I truly, sincerely wish y'all all the best over at Moxie, and we will certainly be keeping an eye on all that y'all have got going on. And again, open invitation. If you ever want to come back and rehash it out, man, you got my contact. Feel free to reach out, man. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing all that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, hey, absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on, and
absolutely
appreciate the good topics too. This is the stuff that we want to be out there talking about. So happy holidays to everyone out there, and to you as well. Thanks for having me on.
And to you too, man. Happy holidays. Be well and stay safe out there. And hopefully we'll be able to talk again soon, man. Keep up the good work. Jordan Lams, everybody. That is it for Hash It Out, y'all. Thank y'all so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. I'm your host, RJ Balde, and I will catch y'all in the next one. Peace out. Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out our channel. Click here to watch another episode of Hash It Out. To find more cannabis industry reporting, insider stories, and to stay up to date on the latest trends, make sure to subscribe and keep up with our TRICHOMES community app. Download it now for free, and we'll see you there.